Long before Jacob ever knew who he would become, his story began in a house filled with waiting and prayer. Isaac and Rebekah had lived for years with empty arms and silent rooms, wondering if God's promise to Abraham would ever reach their generation. Every morning carried hope, and every night returned with disappointment. Then, after 2 decades of longing, their prayers were answered. Rebekah conceived, but even in blessing there was struggle. From the very beginning, her womb felt like a battlefield. 2 lives wrestled inside her, as if destiny itself was already in conflict. Confused and afraid, she cried out to God, and God answered with a mystery. 2 nations were growing within her, and the younger would one day rise above the elder. The order of the world would be reversed. The natural would bow to the chosen. When the twins were born, their differences were obvious. Esau arrived first, strong and wild, covered in red hair like a child of the fields. Jacob followed close behind, gripping his brother's heel, as if unwilling to let go, as if already reaching for something that was not yet his. From that moment, their lives began to move in opposite directions. As they grew, Esau became a hunter, restless and impulsive, living for the thrill of the chase. Jacob stayed near the tents, thoughtful, observant, learning how people think and how moments can be shaped. Their parents noticed the difference. Isaac favored Esau, Rebekah favored Jacob, and without realizing it, love divided their home. One day, when hunger weakened Esau after a long hunt, Jacob saw an opening. A bowl of lentil stew sat steaming before him, and his brother stood desperate. In that fragile moment, Jacob made an offer that would echo through history. Trade your birthright for this meal. Esau laughed at the future and chose the present. He ate, he walked away, and he lost what generations had been waiting for. Jacob had gained something priceless, but he had gained it through calculation, not character. Years later, when Isaac grew old and blind, he prepared to bless his firstborn. He wanted Esau near him one last time, to taste his cooking, to feel his presence, to pass on his legacy. But Rebekah heard his plan. She remembered the prophecy, she remembered God's words, and she decided to act. What followed was deception, woven with love, fear mixed with faith. Jacob dressed in his brother's clothes. Goat skins covered his smooth hands. He entered his father's room with a trembling voice and a borrowed identity. He lied. He hesitated. He lied again. Even when Isaac sensed something was wrong, he trusted what he could touch more than what he could hear. And the blessing was spoken, words of abundance, words of authority, words that could not be taken back. Moments later, Esau returned, and the truth exploded into the room. Isaac shook. Esau cried. Jacob fled. The family broke apart. Jacob ran for his life, leaving behind his mother's embrace and his father's tent. Alone in the wilderness, with nothing but a stone for a pillow, he slept under open skies. And there, in his weakness, God met him. He dreamed of a ladder stretching from earth to heaven, angels moving between worlds, and a voice that promised presence, protection, and purpose. The same promise given to Abraham and Isaac was now given to him. I am with you. I will not leave you. For the first time, Jacob realized that God was not only his father's God. He was becoming his own. He traveled on to his uncle's land and met Rachel at a well. Love struck him instantly. He worked 7 years for her, and the days passed like moments. But on his wedding night, darkness hid the truth, and Jacob, once the deceiver, was deceived. Leah stood beside him in the morning. The man who had tricked his father now tasted betrayal himself. He worked 7 more years for Rachel. He married 2 sisters. Rivalry filled his home. Children were born through longing, competition, and pain. Sons multiplied. A nation quietly took shape. Years passed. Jacob grew wealthy. Flocks increased. Tension rose. God spoke again, "Go home." So Jacob left secretly, crossing rivers and borders, carrying his family and his future. Laban pursued him, but God intervened. Peace was made. The past was finally released. Yet one fear remained: Esau. 20 years had passed, but wounds do not fade easily. When Jacob heard that his brother was approaching with 400 men, terror returned. He divided his family. He prayed. He wept. He sent gifts. He begged God for mercy. That night, alone once more, Jacob wrestled, not with a man, not with an enemy, with God. They struggled until dawn, strength against strength, will against will. Finally, Jacob was wounded, but he refused to let go. "Bless me," he whispered, and God gave him a new name, no longer Jacob, the deceiver, now Israel, the one who wrestles with God. He limped into the morning carrying both pain and promise. When he met Esau, he bowed low, 7 times, a former thief now humbled. And instead of revenge, Esau ran. He embraced him. He wept. Forgiveness replaced fury. 2 broken brothers were healed. Jacob settled in the land. He built altars. He tried to live in peace, but sorrow followed him. His daughter was violated. His sons took revenge. Violence stained his household. God called him back to Bethel. "Purify yourself. Return to me." There, God renewed his covenant. But loss soon followed. Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. The love of Jacob's life was buried beside the road. More pain came. His firstborn failed him. His family struggled. And then came Joseph, the son of his old age, the child of Rachel, the dreamer. Jacob loved him too much. He showed it too openly. A special robe, public favor, quiet pride. His other sons noticed. Hate grew. Dreams inflamed it. And one day, jealousy won. They sold Joseph. They stained his robe with blood. They told their father he was dead. Jacob collapsed. He mourned for years. Nothing comforted him. He lived, but he was not alive. Until famine struck, until Egypt appeared, until truth returned. Joseph was alive, a ruler, a savior. Jacob could hardly breathe when he heard it. But when he saw the wagons, hope returned to his eyes. God spoke again in the night. "Do not be afraid. I am with you." So he went down to Egypt, and there, in a moment of tears and laughter, he held his son again. The boy he thought was lost forever now stood before him in glory. The last years of Jacob's life were peaceful. Surrounded by children and grandchildren, he spoke blessings over each son, shaping the future of a nation with his words. He remembered his ancestors. He requested to be buried among them. And when his time came, he lay back, gathered his feet, and went to rest. His life had been filled with struggle, with mistakes, with deception, with loss, with grace, with mercy, with transformation. He had started as a man who grabbed heels and stole blessings. He ended as a man who wrestled with God and walked in faith. And yet, this is not where the story truly ends, because Jacob's journey was not only about where he went. It was about who he became, and what happened after his death, through his sons, through his people, through history itself, would show just how far God's promise would travel. After Jacob's breath faded and his eyes closed for the last time, silence filled the room. The man who had wrestled with God, fled from his brother, labored for love, buried his wife, and wept for his son was gone. Yet his story did not end in that quiet chamber in Egypt. In many ways, it was only beginning. Joseph held his father's body and wept like a child once more, just as he had years earlier when he thought he would never see him again. The powerful ruler of Egypt became simply a son in mourning. For 70 days, the nation of Egypt grieved with him. Kings and servants, soldiers and priests, all honored the old shepherd who had come as a foreigner and left as a patriarch. When the time of mourning was complete, Joseph led a great procession back to Canaan. Chariots rolled across deserts. Elders walked beside sons, followed their father's coffin through lands he had once crossed alone, with nothing but fear and hope. They buried Jacob in the cave of his fathers, beside Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah. At last, he was home. But even after the funeral, fear lingered in the hearts of his sons. With their father gone, Joseph's brothers began to tremble. The man they had betrayed now held power over their lives. For years, Jacob's presence had been a shield. Now it was gone. They whispered among themselves, "What if Joseph was only kind for our father's sake? What if now he seeks revenge?" So they sent a message to him, bending the truth once again, claiming that Jacob had asked Joseph to forgive them. And when they came in person, they fell to the ground and said, "We are your servants." Joseph wept, not in anger, in sorrow. He saw that even after forgiveness, even after reconciliation, guilt still ruled their hearts. He lifted them up and said words that echoed his grandfather's faith and his father's transformation. "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." With those words, the long chain of deception that had begun with Jacob and Esau finally broke. No more lies. No more revenge. No more hidden bitterness. Grace had the final word, and so the family remained in Egypt. They multiplied. They grew strong. Shepherds became tribes. Children became thousands. Jacob's descendants filled the land, just as God had promised on that lonely night at Bethel. Generations passed. Joseph died, then his brothers, then their children. Memories of favor faded. Gratitude disappeared. A new Pharaoh rose who did not know Joseph. And slowly, quietly, the family of Jacob became slaves. The children of the man who once fled in fear now lived in chains. Brick by brick, whip by whip, year by year. Yet even in bondage God was working, just as he had worked in a barren womb, just as he had worked through stolen blessings, just as he had worked through betrayal and famine. He was preparing deliverance. From among Jacob's descendants, a child would be born in secret, hidden in a basket, drawn from water, raised in a palace, shaped in the desert. His name would be Moses. And through him, God would remember his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God who met Jacob on a stone pillow would shake mountains. The God who renamed a deceiver would free a nation. The God who walked with one frightened man would walk before millions. And when Israel finally left Egypt, carrying bones and memories, they carried Jacob's story with them. They carried the story of a man who failed and was forgiven, who struggled and was transformed, who ran and returned, who lied and learned truth, who feared and found faith. Every time they told their children about Bethel, about Peniel, about Joseph, about the promises, they were really telling Jacob's story again. And that story still lives, because Jacob is not only a name in ancient pages, he is every person who has made mistakes and wondered if God could still use them. He is every heart that has wrestled with guilt, every soul that has limped away from pain, every believer who has learned that blessing does not come from perfection, but from persistence, from refusing to let go of God, from holding on in the dark, from saying, "Bless me," even when wounded. And maybe, somewhere in your own journey, you recognize him, in your fears, in your failures, in your prayers, in your hope, because the same God who shaped Jacob's life is still shaping lives today, still meeting people in lonely places, still turning broken stories into living testimonies, still writing redemption where the world expects ruin. And just as Jacob's journey moved from deception to destiny, from wandering to worship, from fear to faith, because Jacob's story does not end with his sons in Egypt, nor with Moses, leading a nation through the sea. It stretches farther, through deserts and kingdoms, through exile and return, through prophets and promises, until it reaches a moment when the world itself seems to hold its breath. From Jacob came the 12 tribes. From the tribes came kings. From the kings came David. From David came a promise that one day a greater son would come, a king who would not rule by force, but by love, a shepherd who would lay down his life for his sheep, a savior who would carry not only a nation's destiny, but the weight of the world. And in the fullness of time, that promise was fulfilled. In a small town called Bethlehem, near the place where Rachel had once been buried in tears, a child was born, wrapped in cloth, laid in a manger, overlooked by the powerful, welcomed by the humble. He was born into Jacob's family line, a descendant of Israel, the one Christians call Jesus. And when he walked the earth, he carried Jacob's story within him. He met people like Jacob every day, people who had lied, people who had failed, people who had run from God, people who had wrestled with guilt, and he did not turn them away. He invited them closer. He sat with sinners. He healed the broken. He forgave the ashamed. He renamed people, just as God had renamed Jacob. Simon became Peter. Men the unstable became the rock. The fearful became the bold. The weak became witnesses. Just as Jacob had been transformed, so were they. No, and when Jesus spoke about God, he did not speak of a distant force or cold law. He spoke of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not a God of perfect people, a God of faithful promises. And a God who walks with flawed hearts, a God who keeps working, even when humans stumble. Then came the cross. A place of suffering, a place of surrender, a place where once again, blessing came through pain. Just as Jacob had limped away from Peniel, Jesus rose from the grave bearing wounds. Proof that victory sometimes comes through sacrifice. And through him, the blessing promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob spread to the whole world. Not just to one family, not just to one nation, but to every tribe, every language, heart willing to believe. So when you look back at Jacob's life, you are not just reading ancient history. You are seeing the roots of your own faith. You are watching how God builds eternity through ordinary people. Through farmers and shepherds, through dreamers and deceivers, through broken families and wounded hearts. Through people who fall and rise again. Jacob never imagined that his struggle in the dark would echo through centuries. He never knew that his name, Israel, would become the identity of millions. He never realized that his limp would become a symbol of grace. But God knew. From the moment he grasped his brother's heel, from the moment he lay on that stone pillow, from the moment he cried, "Bless me," God was writing something far greater. And he is still writing, right now. In your life, in your choices, in your prayers, in your doubts, in your courage, in your waiting. Maybe you are in a season like Jacob at Bethel, lonely, uncertain, unsure if God is near. Maybe you are at Peniel, wrestling, wounded, refusing to let go. Maybe you are in Egypt, surrounded by blessing, yet still remembering past pain. Or maybe you are on the road, between what was and what will be. Wherever you are, God is there. The same God who followed Jacob from tents to palaces, from exile to inheritance, from fear to faith. He is walking with you, and just as he turned one flawed man into the father of a nation, he can turn your story into a testimony, your wounds into wisdom, your failures into foundations, your struggles into strength. Because with God, no chapter is wasted, no tear is forgotten, no prayer is unheard, no life is insignificant. And the greatest lesson Jacob leaves us is this. You do not have to be perfect to be chosen. Chances you only have to be willing to keep walking, even when you limp, even when you fall. Plungeons. Even when you don't understand, keep walking, keep trusting, keep holding on, because the God of Jacob is still writing stories of redemption, and yours is not finished yet.